Hello, my most amazing artists. Today we are going to be finishing our owl project. So I've painted my owl. I wanted mine to not look realistic, so I painted it pink and purple. Just kind of silly, but I wanted it to kind of look like the Alice in Wonderland owl, or cat, I should say, Cheshire cat. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add texture to the tree and texture to my owl. So I have some handouts for you to look at. The first one shows you some different tree bark texture, and it shows you kind of how to draw. So here's a blank tree, which is what you have now, and you're going to add lines, and it talks about adding not straight lines. If you look, this has this cross out because those lines are straight. Add some kind of wavy lines. You're going to add some short, some longer, and you just add lines to your tree. Here are some other ways. You might have a tree that's got some curves in it, some knots. So you can use curved lines to show a knot. If you wanted to show a knot, you'd have to curve your line. Here's just a really detailed one, so it's up to you as to how detailed you want to draw, but you may look at these handouts. And then for your owls, the same thing. We're going to look at owl texture. Now, tree bark and feathers will have a much different texture. So look at the lines on the owl. The heads usually have different texture lines than the feathers. So I've got several of these handouts, and you can look at any of them, okay? Just share these amongst your group. All right, now, the first thing that you need to do is finish painting. If you have not finished painting, you need to finish painting. So depending on how many people per class need to do that, I will either set up a paint station on the floor near the carpet, or if we have a lot of people that need to finish painting, I'll set up a paint station at one of the tables. So you'll listen and figure out where you need to go. Once you are done painting, you can start working on your texture. And we are going to primarily use a fine point Sharpie, which is this one, which is what we use all the time. And then we're going to introduce this new extra fine point Sharpie, and it is more of like a pen. I don't know if you can see that. It looks like a pen. So you're going to use those two things. I also have oil pastels. If you want to add some texture, some smooth texture with the oil pastels, you can do that. You're just kind of experimenting with the materials. Remember, the only thing is that oil pastels and Sharpie do not mix. So don't color with oil pastels and then try to color on top with the Sharpie. You can color Sharpie and color on top with the oil pastel, but not vice versa. Okay? Do not color on top of oil pastel with a Sharpie. Now, one thing I noticed when I looked at my pictures of my owls is that the pupil of the owl was really big. So I am actually going to make my pupil a little bit bigger and color that in.
I'm sorry for the interruption, teachers. Just one more thing about attendance, and it's on my side. It's nothing that you have done. So please just make sure you posted your attendance or send it down to me on paper or via email. I cannot see who has posted this morning and who has not. So I'm going to totally depend on you this morning for that. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and you have a great day.
Okay, pardon the interruption. So I added a larger pupil with my Sharpie, and now I'm going to add a white kind of highlight with my oil pastel to make it look like the eyes are shining. Remember, I can color on top of Sharpie with oil pastel, but I cannot color on top of oil pastel with Sharpie. Next, I'm going to go work on my tree. So I'm going to take my tree handout. Here it is. And I'm going to kind of decide which one I want to do. And I really like this one where there's the curved, knotty tree branch. Not naughty as in bad, but knotty, like a knot on your shoe. And so I see that the lines kind of start out straight and they curve. And then sometimes there's like a little curvy line in there. And so I'm just going to kind of add, sometimes the lines connect for the tree bark. So I'm just going to sort of go around and add some lines to make my tree look more like a tree. Right now my tree just sort of looks flat. So I want to make my tree look more like a tree. And in order to do that, I am going to add these lines. So I'm going to do that, and I'll show you kind of what that looks like in a minute when I finish. And now let me move on to the owl. You'll finish your whole tree and then move on to your owl. So I'm going to look at one of these owls. It really doesn't matter to me which one. I can see the belly, the wing, and the face on my owl. So I really like this picture because that's the view I'm looking at. But you can use any picture. All right, so I'm going to look at how the feathers are. And I notice there's dark lines and very light lines. So what I may do is I may use some oil pastels after I use my Sharpie. So I'm going to try to make some of these dark lines. There's a lot of dark lines on the forehead of the owl. And it almost looks like there's like some feathers right here on this section of the owl. So I'm going to kind of draw that. Okay. And now right here between the eyes, there are a lot of lines. And I love making my lines just really different. Straight lines can get boring. So I'm just making some really curved, zigzaggy lines. I noticed that the owl has more dark on the top of his forehead. So I'm going to make my lines reflect that. So I'm going to add more heavier, thicker lines there. Okay, and thinner here. I noticed that there's like a curved dark line that goes around the owl's eye. So I think I'm going to try to do that. So it comes up from here. Pardon the interruption.
You're probably good. I just can't see if you posted or not. And if you couldn't post for some reason, then send your name down. But if you have posted it,
so I'm adding that.
Is good, okay?
Remember, just pardon the interruption.
I don't always say things clear. Thank you so much.
Now I'm going to add some parts for the feathers. So, you know, there's really no rhyme or reason to doing this. I'm just kind of looking. There's like some curved lines. Feathers are very soft. So I'm just going to add some thicker sections, and I'm going to just add some lines. Okay. On the breast of my owl, the belly of my owl. I might make the beak a little bit more pronounced. Okay. And really all of my lines that I drew with Sharpie last week, I may go in and outline those because sometimes when you paint, your paint covers those up. So I may go in and outline some of those lines just in case, just to kind of help me to see them better. So I'm just adding texture today. That's all we're doing is adding texture. If you don't finish, we will finish these next week, so don't worry. I'm going to go in and add some more of those thicker texture spots. And then I'll show you what this looks like when I'm finished. So I'm just adding texture to make my owl look more realistic. One other thing, let me show you with the extra fine point Sharpie. This is a really good tool for adding thin lines. And when you are drawing your tree bark, there's a little bit of something called cross-hatching. You can see it here. It's where you draw one way and draw perpendicular lines. So if I draw a line straight up and down, a vertical line, and then I draw a horizontal line through it, sort of like the number sign, that's called cross-hatching. So if I have time, I might take my thin Sharpie and do some cross-hatching. And that just adds more texture. You could just do regular diagonal lines, and then where you want it to be darker, you could add some cross-hatching. And that's going to make your tree bark really look like tree bark. So the more details I add, the more realistic it's going to become. All right, I'll finish this up and then show you what it looks like.